and gentlemen, please welcome your host, Mr. Sydney Roundworld.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to this latest TooFatLardies Oddcast. And with the evenings getting lighter, spring well and truly in the air, we look like we are in the UK on the verge of finally escaping the lockdown. So today, this evening, I'm joined by two great escapists, the Dickie Attenborough and Steve McQueen of Wargaming, Nick Skinner and Richard Clark. Gentlemen, welcome to the escape version of the TooFatLardies Oddcast.
Thank you, Sydney.
Hello, Sydney. How the devil are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
I've just been moving the stove, so we're ready to get out and go under the wire into the big wide world.
I've tucked my socks inside my underpants and I'm ready to empty the contents down my trouser leg.
Your German is very good, Nick, I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Nice. Very good.
Anyway, so great escape puns and jokes out of the way, thank goodness. One of the things we can certainly look forward to is perhaps returning to normality. But before we get there, what have you all been up to whilst we've been in Stalag lockdown since the last TooFatLardies Oddcast, guys?
Well, Sydney, like you, looking forward to coming out of lockdown and starting to see the light emerging. Like many of us, I think probably many of our listeners would have had their jabs in the UK by now. So I'm starting to feel more confident about things. It's been a long time since we got together to do the Oddcast. Seems to have been a lot of painting that's been done, but without much gaming from my perspective. You, Rich?
Very similar, actually. Funnily enough, I've gone from playing voluminous amounts of games to not playing that many. In fact, I have been doing some really exciting and interesting play testing of Mark Backhouse is Ancients rules, which we Strength and Honour, which we've been really enjoying, and that's been interesting. But before Christmas, I was up to like 5 games a week, but I've been a bit poorly. So hopefully we're turning a corner with that. So I kind of decided to put my feet up a bit and have a bit of a rest. But I'm just getting back into gaming with Mark, and that's been really good fun. And he's on holiday this week, so we're hoping to get a game one morning this week and played on Sunday night. So those rules are really, really coming on, which is very exciting. It's nice to get up to like 50,000 men on your side on the table. So they really are big battle sets of rules, but with small figures. So very, very achievable and a really different take on command of forces of that side. So maybe we can talk about that in a little bit when we carry on.
That sounds really good. I mean, myself, like both of you, not played a great deal, hardly anything at all, really. Played quite a bit with the family, board games and stuff like that still. I'm not really playing at the moment because I'm just finishing off painting things for paint, which concluded on the 21st of March. Since then, just really been enjoying myself painting things that I didn't quite get done in the challenge. So maybe turn to those and some things for the workbench a little bit later on.
Good. Now, Sid, you were talking about board games. I want to show you, Sid, because you and I enjoy a love of board games, and I've spoken about this in the past on the Oddcast. I wanted to show it to you. Here we are, Sydney. You remember that our friend Benito in Spain? Hello, Benito. He was playing a Spanish version of a board game, which is Nelson's Attack on Santa Cruz, Tenerife in 1797. And I've got hold of a British version of that game over the last few months. And I've played it solo, and I'm looking forward, Sid, to the day when we can get together and play that over a nice cappuccino or something similar. And I actually had I've been really exploring board games and some of the mechanisms in board games lately as well, a bit more, and seeing what we can do with them. And really had some interesting responses to some stuff that I wrote on Twitter about that, which I wasn't really expecting, but really set some hairs running for me about the way that some of those mechanisms work. So proving that, you know, social media can keep us entertained during lockdown, and we can have some debates that are quite interesting, which is something that wargaming Twitter seems to be good at, that the rest of Twitter doesn't seem to do very well, really.
No,
There's a big divide between normal Twitter and wargaming Twitter. But that game does look terrific. I mean, I think it really has a great deal of potential and looks beautiful. I'm sure the mechanics are quite interesting. I know we talked a little bit about it offline. So that's certainly something which I think when we get back together, we can do things like that. We've got various different plans about things that we want to do. And some of those are very much connected with what we have been doing in the workshop. So that's possibly time for us to walk down a path we haven't trodden in a while and head towards the Lard Island workshop unit. So here we are in the workshop. We're normally used to seeing Panzer tanks. Here we are knee-deep in Landsknechts, French gendarmes, Italian pikemen, and Swiss halberdiers. Rich, you seem to have started your project in the wrong place, though. I don't know about you, but I always seem to start a project concentrating on the line troops and only at the end get into the King of France or the really sort of fancy-dancy, all singing and all dancing elite cavalry. But your project seems to have started at the end and doing the pretty stuff first. I mean, is that breaking a horrific wargaming taboo that we all have? I mean, looking over here, we've got encampments, we've got looters, we've got a command base with some incredible hand-plated flags. Good work there, mate. Camp followers, and even a cow. What on earth is going on? I mean, this looks like the pantomime in Colwyn Bay. I mean, there's a war game. I mean, what have you been doing? You know, what's the approach here? Is there any method to your madness, sir?
I thought you'd like the cow, Sid, when you were at Prestatyn in Panto. They had that cow, didn't they, where he sold them for beans or something like that. For I remember when we came up to see you there. That was
very memorable. I was the front half before I started.
And you certainly wowed them, Sydney. Yeah, well, to be honest with you, this is a project that started off about me fancying doing something, but as it's grown and developed, I decided that the whole project should really be about the visual experience as much as anything else. I mean, obviously, I'm doing the historical research, but you know, you mentioned the cow. You know, I read reading a bit of history the other day about the Swabians offending the Swiss by taking a cow along and mocking them and saying, "Here we are, we bought your cow," and suggesting that the Swiss had unnatural relationships with cows, and the Swiss got very upset, and that started a war. They ran down, set alight to a house, pushed over a market stall, and then the whole thing kicked off, and it became this bizarre war in the 1490s. And I just thought, this is fabulous. Something like that really needs representing on the table. The Kuhschweiss, as the Landsknechts called them. And looters and those encampments. I mean, when you look at the train that followed a farm line, a company of Landsknechts, you know, there was one wagon for every 8 men, every 8 to 10 men. You know, that's 40 wagons. Plus, then you've got the officers who are going to have numerous wagons, and then you've got the camp followers. That's something that needs representing on the tabletop, because that's something that needs protecting. And if you're going to protect it, you want to have a fabulous looking camp with strange looking characters, you know, the traders and merchants and the Landsknecht wives who are there to provide all sorts of assistance. So it was all about really trying to paint these vignettes to make the game look as much as possible like the illuminated manuscripts of the period. So one of the things I'm looking at doing now is you get these fabulous pictures of the town in the background, where you've got the round towers that look like a bit of old bog roll, you know, they're perfectly cylindrical, and the walls, and then you get the town's elders peeking over the battlements. And I thought, that's what I want for the edge of the table. I want this thing about 6 inches by 12 inches of a town. And I thought I could make it out of old bog roll centres, the cardboard bits, and have the figures of the burghers sticking their heads over the top parapets, and that will all be drawn in terms of inspiration from those documents that I've been looking at, like the Bern Chronicle and the Lucerne Chronicle. And that I've also used in terms of painting the flags that you mentioned, because, you know, I was short on sources for what Swiss officers look like and what flags were present, you know, because you're doing you get the cantonal flags, which we can all find, but there must have been sort of the nobility, the flags of the nobility, and so on and so forth. So by going back to the chronicles from that period, I've been able to find them and create these lovely flags, which really just cut and paste, you know, screen grab from the chronicles, and then put it into PowerPoint and clean it up a bit, and then print it out and paint over it, and you get a great result, which looks like it's a perfect hand-painted flag, but actually it's a complete cheat. But that's fine. I'm quite happy to cheat, as long as when I put it on the table, it looks great. So I really wanted those vignettes to be there and be a spectacle. And I think, Nick, this is something we've talked about for many periods. You were telling me on the phone the other day about the Mexicans that you're painting up, because you're doing some Tex-Mex stuff, aren't you?
Tex-Mex, yeah.
Burritos,
well, of course,
and,
yeah, the burrito battles. I came into the year with all good intentions, didn't I? We were talking about what we were going to focus on and what wars we were going to do, and so on and so forth. And then I played a game of filibusters. So Colin Murray wrote a great piece on filibusters for the Lard magazine 2020, which I really enjoyed putting together.
Is that Colonel Colin Murray?
Colonel Colin Murray. Yeah, that's him. So a special shout out to Colin. Oi! And
see you.
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to play in his game of filibusters in Virtual Lard 4, I think it was, which was really good fun. I enjoyed that a lot. And it started me, you know, I was laying in bed thinking about Colin Murray and playing his game, as you do. And my mind's made a connection to Mexicans and the Alamo. And I just found myself then on the Boot Hill Miniatures website, and Boot Hill do some really, really lovely 28mm stuff for the Alamo. Let me say that they are, you know, I've got lots of figures from lots of different manufacturers over the years, but the quality of what I received from Boot Hill absolutely knocked my socks off. Really lovely, expression-filled figures. Which paint up beautifully, and for the Mexicans especially, you know, the Mexicans in the Alamo, they're very much like the French Napoleonic uniforms. For those of you that are familiar with those, but of course they're a little bit easier. They're not quite as fancy as the French, and that's a certain appeal that goes with that too. And then when you get these lovely figures that are so well sculpted, you can't help but want to put them in little vignettes. You can't help but you know, put one figure next to another one at a certain angle, and it almost becomes like they're in a conversation, or certain, you can see that there's something going on there that you could easily create on a diorama base or create a little vignette, and the ability to do those with great quality figures like that becomes really easy. And yes, vignettes are brilliant ways of making your table look more interesting. You know, Sid, I think you said in the past about how they, you know, on flat tables, you know, they just give a spark of life to that. But also they're kind of good fun to create and make, because they indulge the inner modeler or creative artist within you to create these bases that you can then use. So they're more than just something for the tabletop. There's something that can really focus your interest in a period and allow it to have a little bit of artistic outlet. So I've done a Mexican, for instance. Boot Hill do a Mexican. He's supposed to be wounded. He's on the floor holding his head. So I thought, well, let's not do him wounded. I'm going to do him on a base with a couple of barrels next to him and some loads of beer bottles, so it looks like he's pissed, because that's, you know, that's good fun to do as well, isn't it? It gives it a bit of fun and a bit of it just adds a little bit more to the tabletop. So they're really good fun to do. And if you find a good range of figures, you can sometimes use the figures out the pack. Very often you're going to have to do some conversion work, and that makes it a bit more fun too. So I think the time we invest in them is probably well, more than we should maybe, you know, but actually it's all part of the fun, isn't it? It's what makes it attractive. What do you think, Sid? You're nodding like a dog.
Yeah, you are the king of vignettes, really, aren't you, Sydney? I mean, you're well known on your blog for the ridiculous amount of detail that you put into some of the superb stuff you do.
Probably too much vignettes and not enough fighting troops sometimes. I mean, I'd echo everything you've said, really. To be honest, I think there's a couple of sort of additional points I'd make. I think one of the real things about vignettes is that they do bring a table to life. And we talked about this earlier. I know that in a modern period where you've got a lot of terrain on the table, almost everything's a vignette. I mean, every building might be a vignette, and you've got a lot of things going on. But in the earlier periods, I mean, the Renaissance is a good example, but obviously medieval and ancient periods probably have a flat table because the armies had to want to fight. You know, there wasn't so many encounter battles. There were some, but they were not the preponderance. So you really had to find a place that you could marshal your forces, take the field, and fight whoever you were fighting, the Duke of Milan or whatever it was in the Renaissance. So I think if you've got a flat table, then vignettes are really useful and important because they create that visual context in which the game's being set. And you can also have vignettes which are static, scenic vignettes. The classic would be something like around a farmyard, for instance. But I think you can also have a lot of moving vignettes, vignettes which are more like gaming pieces. And there's a blend between the sort of scenic vignettes and the actual troops on the table. So one of the things I've tried to do is to play around with that and have routed units and units which are last stand units, which are on the tabletop themselves, which are somewhere between the active unit which you're commanding and something which occupies a really important place in the battle. So it's a unit which is disintegrated but not yet routed. Can one of the enemy forces actually rout that unit? Well, rather than just having a normal unit standing around and looking pristine, you can create a vignette of troops which are wounded or kind of shattered, and the standards can be all ripped up. And that's a nice modelling project, but it's also got a point within the game itself. And coming back to what you were saying, Rich, about visual images, when you look at paintings from the time, anything really from medieval onwards, the artists depicting those battles were seeing things like that and trying to reflect not just pristine forces, but other stages of the battle. And I think that the closer that you get to try and replicating some of those elements on the tabletop, the more you're going to draw people in, the more people are going to have that agency to think of themselves as participating in a specific battle. It's not just red or blue. It's not just something which feels like Napoleonics. It's really something which has much more of a sort of traction, much more grit of the period you're trying to replicate. And vignettes, I think, like memoirs, reading memoirs from the participants at the time, vignettes do that. They help us as wargamers.
And there are so many ways you can use them as well, aren't there? Because if you think of all our rules, for instance, their vignettes are perfect for jump-off points for chain of command. They're great for jump-off deployment points in sharp practice. You can use them in infamy. You can use them in ducks. They're a great way to add to the tabletop, and they give it that visual appeal. And I'm just thinking there, as you said that, Sid, these days, of course, war games get photographed like never before. We've all got cameras on our phones, and we're always taking photos. We do any show, we do any game at any show, there's always lots of people around taking photos. You game between two mates, people tend to take photos, share on social media and whatever. Vignettes, of course, are an artistic way of creating, sharing what's going on that tabletop. So you're not just seeing the bland figures, you're seeing part of the story told out. So you use vignettes, as you said, Sid, to represent a shattered unit, or you may have a vignette of a knocked out tank, or it may be a dead cavalryman, or you might use them as casualty markers. They're all telling the story of the battle. And that when, this is a visual hobby. One of the things that's really struck me about board games and tabletop games lately is the visual aspect of what we do with our figures and why we choose to do it that way. And so it's really natural that we would have loads of vignettes on the table that tell the story, that bring the table to life, that have a cat sitting on top of the dustbins, because there's something about that that's really natural, that makes the table come to life.
Yeah, one of the things that I was keen to do in Infamy was to allow people to create vignettes that had a purpose. So those ambush points and the deployment points there do that perfectly. But one of the things that I've been looking at doing with the vignettes in the Renaissance Italian Wars project is creating a vignette with a purpose. So, for example, the cow of love that the Swabians could use to try and goad the Swiss is a support option, and you would play it as you would play a piece in a board game. If you're sending out looters to go and loot the enemy camp, you would send out, rather than shuffling a 40 by 40 or 50 by 50 mil base of pikemen out to do it, you'll actually replace that with a little vignette of looters, and that then becomes a playing piece. And as a base of looters, it's more disordered than a normal base of troops, so it would be easier if anybody comes to get it to bash them over the head. And it's the idea of creating these and making them an integral part of the game, not just a piece of terrain, that really appeals to me. And of course, the other thing is, we talked about Wargaming Mojo, painting Mojo on a previous Oddcast. If your Mojo is gone, just get yourself some figures and put them together. I want to talk about Perry Miniatures, but Nick, I know you're bursting to say something.
I can't remember what I was going to say now. I was bursting to say that this idea about the vignette, there's more and more, 3D printed scatter. Yeah. It's much easier now to create this scatter, and also the quality of figures. We're seeing more plastics, so it's easier to chop an arm off here or cut a head off there and do an adaptation and create a conversion than it's ever been. The figures are much better quality now than they were many years ago. When I started in this hobby buying metal figures, we were buying Hinchcliffe figures, which okay, at the time we thought were fantastic, but they wouldn't stack up these days in terms of the quality of the sculpts. When I compare those to what I got from Boot Hill, for instance, there's just no comparison. No. So the quality of it lends itself to the vignette because it's so attractive to make that and to make it look good. And you don't have to be a fantastic painter or an artist to make it happen. You can just take two figures that are full of life, put them on a round base with some other bits of scatter. There you've got a bit of a story that can go on the tabletop. And what you said there, Rich, about mixing up, getting your mojo back is really important. I find it very, very boring to paint regiments of figures. So I nearly always put a vignette of some kind in with whatever I'm painting. There's always something on the end, a command point, jump off point, whatever it is, just makes it much more fun to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, I don't know if we're going to do a best bit on the bench, but one of the things that I've got to mention is the fun that I've had with plastic figures on this project. Now, I regularly whinge and moan about plastic figures because I sometimes find that whilst you've got, a box of plastic infantry for whatever period you want to do, and you think, well, there's going to be unlimited amount of options about how I can stick these together. 9 times out of 10, there's not, because that set of arms are very much designed to go with that torso, and that torso very much designed to go with those legs or whatever. And actually, the only real choice you've got is the heads, which head you use and which torso, and which direction he's looking, left, right, or he or she is looking left, right, or head on. But one of the real fun things I've had with Perry Miniatures is I can get their mercenary figures for the sort of 1450 to 1500 period. I can get a box of their light cavalry. I can get a box of their foot knights. I can get a box of their mounted men-at-arms and knights. And that's a great start. And if I then chuck in a couple of sprues of Warlord Games plastic Landsknecks, I have got so many options in there because there's so many sets of arms and so many heads and so many pouches and daggers and swords and this, that, and the other. And I've had a fabulous time. And the other thing Perry Miniatures do, I've got a pack of them here, is some heads for the Italian wars specifically. Well, they do Tudor heads, which I've just used for my Gascon crossbowmen, but they do Italian heads, they do Swiss heads, and once you add in those metal bits and pieces, the world is your oyster, as they say, in terms of creating things that you wouldn't dream of doing. So I am actually, that classic Renaissance woodcut of the figure on the wheel, broken on the wheel, suspended up there. I'm using a naked Gaul from Victrix to create this sort of awful vignette that you see in those woodcuts to give a bit of background. Maybe that's you can use that as a marker to encourage your troops. If they're thinking about routing, you can put this figure broken on the wheel on the table.
A quick point on that, Sid, because I know you want to come in. When you're doing that with plastics, you have to see beyond what says on the packet, don't you?
No, you
so
don't.
Yeah, a left arm is a left arm. It's just because it's in a German box doesn't mean you have to use it on a German figure. Let's face it, a tunic arm is pretty much the same the world over if you're in World War II. So you have to see beyond what's on the packet. So the bear head, the head without a hat.
Yeah,
I love those because they can go absolutely anywhere. They could be on a World War II figure, they could be on a tank commander, they could be on a Roman soldier, whatever. The bear head, I love it. With more and more bear heads. Every time I get a packet with a bear head in it, I think, oh, joy, because I know that I'm going to get some use out of that.
Yeah, I wanted a kneeling Celtish scout to form an ambush point or a deployment point for my Roman imperial troops in Infamy. And I used the kneeling legs of a World War II German. I just filed the jackboots off and put some green stuff on.
Brilliant.
I thought, well, that's why not? And that worked perfectly well.
Yeah, I've done all of those kind of things. I mean, I think you've done much more than I have, actually. It's a really good point about looking at the figures and seeing what's really within them. There's a well-known blog, unfortunately, I can't remember the name of it, but the gentleman has been doing the Tudor army of Henry VIII, and he's been converting Penimardists to be, with the addition of green stuff, all sorts of Renaissance infantry models. He's done a beautiful job of that. And I think that it's seeing the potential in the figure. I'm a bit less served with that, I've got to say, doing the late 17th century, because there's no plastics really available which are comparable. So you do have to hunt around for sort of things and convert. But lopping off heads, swapping heads, make other things which are pretty easy and you get good at is just adding lots of green stuff or making your own hats, which are then sort of positioned in people's hands and stuff. There's an awful lot you can do, and it all adds to the fun. But going back to the sort of key point, I think that at some point you do look at the vignettes and think, well, what am I really doing? Am I just making static bits of theatre dressing? And I think the key to keep interested with vignettes is what you've both done, is really making them part of the game. I mean, Rich, you said playing pieces. I think that's a really good suggestion, because you're using those talents as something that you can use time and time again, because it's really part of the army and it comes out at a particular point. Yeah. And I think we all, from our games of, whether it's been the SPI board games or more modern board games, we always like that idea, I think, of flipping a counter, of changing something which was there at the start has changed. And I think wargaming gives us a real opportunity to actually replace figures on the table. It's not just a case of taking them off. It's the case, in certain situations, of replacing the figures with a different token, a different base. And that can really freshen up the game. And people just kind of love that when you do it. And it's not just placing a casualty figure on the table, which is basically just dead. It's something which is moving and has its own rules and its own dynamics.
I love that, Sid. Absolutely think that's a brilliant point, because that's, as I said, it's a visual hobby. So the more we can do that. So when you've got a base of 6 marching French infantrymen, if you can substitute those 6 for some guys that look like they've been hit with round shot or whatever, there's a kind of a guy falling wounded, you can just get that feeling of there's a battle going on. And the bits around the edges are what give you that. So I love that, Sid. I agree with you 100%. Where are we now? Where are we at? So we got a best bit on the bench then or not? Because we were kind of talking about whether we like Perry's, Boot Hill, plastic conversions. I mean, plastics themselves are always a best bit on the bench, I find, because they just give you the flexibility that you can make whatever you need to make, and you can, inspire your creative juices sometimes just by playing around with them. Sid?
Well, on vignettes and moving vignettes, I after the painting challenge had finished, I had some French dragoons which I've been painting up and finished those off, and I'd done some horse holders with them. And I really like the Ebor Miniatures French dragoon horse holders. So it's a bit of an unloved kind of thing. You think, well, do I really need horse holders? What I really want is dragoons with muskets. It's a bit like, what do I really want? Give me more ski troops or whatever. But actually, it's things like that which, when we've played ACW games, don't just bring the game to life. They make sense tactically as well. And the Ebor Minis, Ebor Miniatures 28mm French dragoon horse holders, and they do other dragoon horse holders, are absolutely beautiful. So it's a bit on the bench. I'm not sure it's really a best bit on the bench because it's just figures, but it's how you use them. And I strongly recommend them. They're a very nice company to deal with as well.
Okay, good. Well, I'm happy to say there's no best bit on the bench, but it's just all great.
Lots of good bits.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you both for that. That's all very positive stuff, which is, after all, what we're really looking for as we escape from lockdown.
I've got a best bit on the bench.
Oh, here we go.
Sorry, he does this to us all the time. He makes us agree that we haven't got one, and then all of a sudden he whips one out and says, "Look at that."
He trumps it, doesn't he? He
trumps it. We're in what are we supposed to do now? Are we supposed to say yes, or are we supposed to say no? That's rubbish. We can only say we can only agree, can't we? We're kind of ambushed now.
Right.
Yeah, we're kind of stuffed. Go on, Rich.
I think you might agree with this. I'm going to bring out, and it's not really a workshop best bit on the bench, but it's something I feel it's important we give a shout out to. War Games Illustrated magazine, 400th edition this month, which is fabulous. And I have to say that War Games Illustrated magazine was the first magazine in which I had any articles published, and Duncan McFarlane encouraged me hugely. I was a young man at the time, in my 20s, so not that long ago, folks. And Duncan, who established the magazine and set it up, really gave me a lot of encouragement in terms of publishing the stuff I was doing, as shoddy as it was, I'm sure, in those days. So I really just want to say a big thank you to War Games Illustrated magazine, because without that magazine, I don't think TooFatLardies would exist. So,
well, I don't think I would have been a war gamer without that magazine, probably either. So, yeah, all the magazines around the hobby are vitally important for generating interest, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I mean, yeah, and the great thing is with magazines like War Game Soldiers and Strategy and War Games Illustrated is you don't have to have your shelves packed with old magazines. You know, you can get them and keep them in a PDF format and read them on your tablet, so they're very, very accessible. So they're really moving with the times, if you like. And I think the inspiration that's still to be had from those magazines is something that we need to focus on, because it's very easy to say, oh, there's nothing in that edition of the magazine that I'm interested in, so I'm not going to buy it, or I'm not going to subscribe. The fact of the matter is that if we don't subscribe to these publications, they will die out. You can't just cherry pick what you want. And for £5 a month or whatever it is, I feel that's a very, very minimal investment to keep two really great hobby magazines going. Sid?
I would echo all of that. And I honestly remember, not just with War Games Illustrated, and congrats to War Games Illustrated on that, but also Miniature War Games. You know, in the early 80s, there really was, after military modelling got rid of battle, there was really nothing. And I can remember getting the first issues of Miniature War Games, bought that, and then when Duncan moved to set up War Games Illustrated in about 86 or 87, definitely getting that. And that was just so inspirational. There was nothing else. And that was the hobby I wanted. And over the years, the magazines have evolved, but they are always something which you can get inspiration from, not necessarily immediately as you read through the articles, but when you come back to them, and they're a great store for not just inspiration, but the knowledge that somebody else is doing something that you're interested in. You're not just ploughing a lone furrow. Other people have ideas which are, off the beaten track. They have ideas of how to do things. And it's often the case, you can go back to a magazine which you haven't looked at in 2-3 years, and you can just within 20 minutes be immersed in an article on something which you'd just forgotten about completely. They're a great resource.
It gives you a chance to join into a different conversation, doesn't it? To tune into a different transmission, to have a light shone in different corners of the hobby. Things that you wouldn't normally look at would appear in there, capture your eye in the magazine. But crucially for me also, I find that I look at them because I'm looking at the adverts. So if I think people say, oh, well, why do I bother advertising in these magazines? Is it worth it, etc.? I would say that if you're trying to reach me, it's a great way, because I look through those and I do look for the adverts. I look at what's out there, what's coming out, what's new. You get a reminder of businesses that have been around for a long time, or you get some new products put under your nose from new businesses. So I think the advertising in them is massively important from my perspective as well. And I know it's important to those magazines that they get that advertising advertising, but I think actually it's every time I open any of the war games press I go through, I always end up buying something. I nearly always go past the figure reviews or the adverts are on the first few pages, and then what I've done is I've gone off and I've looked online and I've ended up spending some money. So they're probably costing me quite a lot of money, but they're really essential part of the hobby for sure. I love them. Well done to the team at WI.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to give them a shout out. So I think War Games Illustrated 400 edition, well done, best bit on the bench.
Well, congratulations there again. All positive stuff. I think now, though, it's time to wander back to the studio to see what big issue is awaiting us.
Big issue.
Sydney Roundwood's Sofa of Sincerity.
Gentlemen, welcome back to the Sofa of Contemplation. More salubrious environment, I think you'll agree. Anyway, as we know, when we're looking for what big issue to discuss, we always like to look into the postbag to see what our listeners are asking. And I had an email recently from our old friend, Ned Sullivan, down under at Rumour Gamma in New South Wales, Australia. Ned sent an email from his camp by a billabong saying, for a bloke like me, the big problem I face is not getting figures or rules sets sent across the globe, but dealing with the ever-present problem.
It sounds like he's from Cornwall.
but dealing with the ever-present problem of storage. I just never have enough of it. What methods have you pommy blokes used, and what has worked and what hasn't? Oh, thank you very much, Ned. That's much appreciated.
Yes, if you'd like to complain about anything here in this podcast,
I don't think that quite qualifies as cultural appropriation, see? There is anything Australian in that.
Please send your letter of complaint to Guy Bowers at War Game Soldiers and Strategy Magazine.
Podcast, that's right. Yeah.
So Ned is asking a very sensible question, really, about storage. I mean, here we are talking about vignettes, we're talking about figures, we've talked about terrain in the past. We've also talked about having multiple periods of wargaming interest. So unless we're doing everything in something like 2mm or 6mm, the problem of storage is going to be a challenge at some point. And the older you get, that storage challenge doesn't seem to dissipate. It seems to increase. And I don't think it's just wargamers. I think it's record collectors, it's role players, it's people who have multiple sort of bags of golf clubs around the garage. A lot of my friends have things like that. I mean, what do we think about storage and wargaming? What's worked for us? What's worked for you two guys? And what hasn't worked?
Sid, let me say that this is a subject close to my heart. Anyone who knows me knows that I am constantly struggling with storage. Being
Not surprising if you buy something every time you pick up a bloody magazine, is it?
Well, that's part of it, and we know that lots of wargamers do that. You kind of, what's the hobby? The hobby might actually be, sometimes you think the hobby is buying stuff. Okay, that's that's the case for some of us. We build collections up, almost hoarding. But yeah, as a man of modest means, I find that space is an issue, especially as a man of modest means who's fertile enough to have fathered many children who are still living under the roof, principally, even though they're off at college and coming back. The space to store things is really, really difficult. And I have tried just about every method under the sun to try and store things sensibly. I mean, do you want me to list out what I've tried, and or do you want to go on to have a broader discussion first? Do you want me to list some of these, Sid?
I think it's good to start us off with a list, and then we can come back to it.
So here's a list I was scribbling down. When you said we're going to talk about this, I've written down Bisley cabinets, so metal storage filing cabinets. Okay, I've used those. I've still got those. Really useful boxes. They really are really useful. KR multi-case, so proper designed cases to keep figures in. Tabletop Tyrant carrying cases. Citadel briefcases, box files with the spring taken out, so you can just lift the lid off and store your stuff standing up like that. What are they called there? Stanley toolboxes of different makes and types. So you get the metal blue ones that open up with the sort of concertina.
Yeah,
They'll
like
open up
the DeLorean winged car.
Yeah, some of those. I remember in the old days, Rich, you probably, I don't know if you remember, but my Platoon 20 Vietnam figures used to live in a blue toolbox, and I'd open them up, and you have a bigger space at the bottom that was good for putting helicopters in, and then you have individual racks that were great size for the figures. I've used those. I've used those silver, what they call aluminium suitcases that they use to, in all the films they've got cameras or 50 million pounds in used 20s. It's the kind of thing they keep in those. What else have we got? What does that say there? Some kind of boxes, toolboxes, yep. And then when you get to the other end of the scale, you get terrain items. You get the supermarket crates. You want bigger boxes, so you use any old cardboard box. Really useful boxes. You got the supermarket delivery crates. The guy from Ocado comes with your fruit and veg, and you try and nick a crate off him because you know it's going to be fantastic to put your stuff in.
Well, you shouldn't say that. My daughter works for them at head office.
He comes in with 3, he leaves with 2. That's. But you can also buy them. You can also buy them, and of course I've never sourced any in that particular way, but I know people who have. So and Rich, you're going to say about your banana boxes because they're fantastic as well.
I quite happily steal these from the supermarket because they're free. The cardboard boxes that bananas come in, the banana trays, they're what are they? They're about 2'6" by 20 inches, and they're designed to stack up on top of each other. So in each corner, they're slightly raised, and in the bottom they have a corresponding hole, so you can stack them up and up. So I use them largely for big items like terrain specifically. And my War Games table has got a shelf underneath on which I can put 2 of them, and then on the floor underneath that there's another space for another 2 of them. So I can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 16 of those banana boxes, and they're quite happy for you to take them away. They're free. But
the problems just seem to be getting worse and worse. So from my perspective, for instance, 3D terrain is more and more common these days. So 3D buildings, 3D printed buildings are becoming more common. There's greater range of MDF buildings, and buildings are the big space thief, aren't they? Because you buy a building from Sarissa or War Bases and it's flat pack. Yeah. And then you make it, and all of a sudden it's 2 cubic feet or whatever that is, and it just takes up more and more space. And the buildings, more than anything, are probably causing me a massive problem. So how can I do this? How can I store my stuff effectively? I mean, because I've still got all of those things that I read out, right? Mm-hmm. I am still using all of those. Yeah. I've got the only one I'm not using anymore is the blue metal toolbox, but everything else I read out I'm using to store stuff in. What am I doing wrong? How can I do it better? How can I store my buildings more effectively? Or do I just need to go and buy a bigger house?
Well, alternatively, throw your kids out. That's what I'm doing. My youngest daughter leaves home at the end of this week, so we're empty nesters. And I haven't yet suggested to the wife that Emma's bedroom becomes another War Games room, and I'm not quite sure what she'll say if I did.
Well, do you want me to tell you what she'll say?
I've got a shrewd idea, if I'm honest. The honest answer is buy a bigger house, create more space. Doesn't work. It's not a practical. Well, of course it does work, but it's not a practical use of cash to spend another £200,000 in the southeast of England where we live just to have an extra room that you can put War Game stuff in.
Which I would fill up in about 2 months probably.
Yeah, exactly. Well, stuff expands to fill the space available. One of the key things that I have found in terms of making storage effective is being tidy. And I'm not. I'm not.
Sorry, I couldn't help control myself there. I thought you were trying to say you were tidy.
But if I ever get to the point where I go, bloody hell, I can't fit another ant in the storage space available, what I do is I spend 2 days clearing out all the crap I've got strewn everywhere in a sort of mad professor-like style. And in doing so, I always find stuff I think, actually, I don't want that. Or it's probably broken. Or beyond repair, and I think, well, I'll oink that out, and I'll chuck that out, and then I think, why did I save all these plastic sprues where stuff on it is there's barely anything left on each one. So I get a pair of pliers and I get a little plastic box and I cut all those Australian heads off or whatever, and I put them in a little plastic spares box. And then by being tidy, I create space that I then fill with more crap.
But do you accept, Rich? Do you accept that things get damaged and therefore, you can't keep them in pristine condition because they're going to be used?
Yeah.
And this is where you and I are different, because I will make things that are much more fragile than you are, because I like the model and I'd be more content to take care of it. Whereas you will make something that's much more robust and will survive being thrown in a corner for 6 months.
Yeah.
And then when it comes out again, it might still be in one piece, it might not. Does that matter to you? Does that affect your storage decisions?
It doesn't really matter to me, because I always think if I build that Venezuelan llama farm, I'm never going to use it in any other game ever again.
Well, you should do more Venezuelan llama farm games. It might just be the job for my Alamo Mexicans, I'm looking for that kind of thing.
Looking for llamas.
Sid, come on, you've got, we know that everything about you is huge, including your storage space, I suspect. So tell us how you do it.
It's not as huge as anyone would want. I think that's the problem, isn't it? That you tend to fill it. I think there's a few things that you've mentioned which I try and do. I always try and avoid those metal toolboxes. They, for me, are just completely 1980s, and they were just horrific then and still are now. I think being tidy is a big, important thing. You just can't really store anything sensibly when you've got rubbish everywhere. I think having one single location, whether it's glass-fronted cabinets or some way of looking at the terrain, is great for your best pieces or favourite bits of terrain, or the ones you're using. Everything else gets packed away.
That's what I should suggest. I should suggest some glass-fronted cabinets for the lounge that I can put my figures in. The wife would love that.
It's probably not best not in the lounge. I used to remember when I was first married, I used to have one of the glass-fronted cabinets which was full of my samurai army, and my wife used to complain about it because, quote, she didn't like the way they looked. I don't know if that was the severed head they were carrying.
Coming over here, taking our cabinets.
That's a true story, actually. But anyway, so I think having one place where you can display things, if you like to see, if you like to look at stuff, if you want it easily accessible, that's fine. And then just pack everything else away and make sure it's packed competently. I think the other thing really is trying with terrain is to get as much use out of it. I mean, the Venezuelan llama farm, I don't think I'd really want to build something like that, but I would want to build, as we did in the Christmas special, small footprinted terrain which can be used in a variety of different European scenarios, covering about 500 years or something like that. I think then you get the most use out of the storage and the terrain, and you've got a happy marriage really there of the two going together. I think the other thing is dropping down scales as well. I mean, a lot of people have said this. It's not just me. If you do drop down a scale, even if it's just 28 to 15s, let alone 10, 6, and 2, it's just incredible how much you can store. I mean, my whole 30 Years War stuff is really in 4 A4 boxes. That's figures, terrain, everything. Yeah, absolutely everything. And that's about 5 armies. And you stagger and you stack up I've got different levels in each one of the small boxes. So it's amazing what you can get into a small space if you've dropped down scale. It doesn't work for everyone, but that is really a consideration which I've heard a lot of people talk about.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's things that are really good for storage, and there's things that work better for transportation. So the Bisley cabinets, the slide out drawers, the slide out metal drawers, if they're static, they're fantastic. But I used to keep my 15mm my 15mm World War II stuff in there because it fits nicely in the whatever it is, 1.5 inch deep drawer, something like that. But of course, when you then take it to a game or take it to a club, you put it in the boot of a car. Everything slides around all over the place. Yeah. Even with magnets, there's no guarantee of that. So we've got things that are really good for storing, things that are good for transporting. I just find it really tough to do that. Really useful boxes appear to be a really common and really useful and practical solution because they stack so well and they can transport well. And these days, I know there are businesses that will sell you inserts that allow you to get, sort of 2 rows of figures inside a really useful box. So really, and I know lots of people use those. And I'm thinking about transferring everything to really useful boxes, but gosh, there's an expense in that as well, isn't there? They're not cheap.
Funny enough, I was just looking at them because I need some for my Renaissance stuff, because all of a sudden I've got 28mm figures with pikes, which are a lot bigger than 28mm World War II, a lot taller than 28mm World War II figures. Yeah, and somebody was telling me yesterday, I think, that the 11-litre really useful box is really useful and great for troops with pikes. Great, well, it's 15 quid a box. You know, and I need several. The other thing about really useful boxes is you do end up storing a lot of fresh air.
Yeah.
Whereas if you use something like the figures in Comfort or the KR multi-case, where you put the individual figures in their own little socket, which, let's say for argument, is 30mm by 20mm, you tend to find yourself cramming a lot more in. But I'm not entirely convinced that they don't rub the paint off, but that's another issue. Bisley, the Bisley cabinet, I think we ought to mention for people who aren't aware of them, Bisley, apart from being a place where people shoot, is a cabinet maker, metal cabinet, designed for offices. They make things like filing cabinets, but the ones we're talking about are actually sort of stationary drawers, which each drawer is about 1.5 inches deep. And they're large enough to hold sheets of A4 or foolscap paper, and they are great because you're not storing that much fresh air. But they're not really, they're okay for 28mm. But if you've got people with flags or arms in the air, they're no good for that. They're fine for 15mm. So different scales have different things that work really well. So my Victrix 12mm stuff for World War II is all in a shoebox at the moment because I haven't sorted out a solution. It's not a great solution, but and again, there's a lot of fresh air in there because they're only 12mm tall. But it's a case of trying to be tidy, not just in terms of the way you store things, but so you're not storing fresh air. Sid?
Yeah, absolutely. And some armies are very difficult to store. And pike armies, though they are the sort of queens of the battlefield, pikes are a real pain. And I think storing them in a way that you are able to access them as well takes a bit of thought. And that leads on to another point relating to pikes, because they are so unwieldy. You tend to want to sort of put them on their own in a box with all the other pikes. And then I think that looks like a good idea until then you try to sort everything out from the storage. One thing over the last few years I've tried to do is buy. I bought loads of boxes from a UK stationery supplier. I mean, it's both Ryman's and Paperchase. They're small boxes. You can get 2 regiments in each. You can identify on the box what's in the regiment. On the box what regiments are within. And then when you want a game, you can just pull the box off the shelf. So many times I think we've just got collections off the shelf, and you end up taking everything to the club or everything to a game. One of the things with storage, if you're not only got storage, you store it, you've got to get it as well, and get it in a way which is practicable. It's pretty useless if it's stored and you can't find it. You might as well not have it. I think if you've got whatever you've got, store and identify it however you want to identify it in a list of boxes, numbers, or labels on the box or whatever.
Do you base things? Do you think about how you're going to store it when you base things? So buildings, for instance, the footprint of buildings is getting bigger. Sid, your article in the in Live magazine at Christmas was fantastic about small footprint terrain. But in other areas, so World War II games, for instance, because we're working at a battlefield which is a small level of detail, we're looking at, we've not just got the house, we've also got the back garden, we've got the greenhouse, we've got the dustbins, we've got a wheelbarrow, we've got the field next to it with growing crops in it. All this stuff is just like becoming huge, isn't it? Do you think about that when you make your purchase or when you build your buildings?
Yeah, well, I'm still doing a lot of scratch building. So last year I built one of the villages for Flanders, and in addition to the sort of stuff I did for the magazine, and I bought the box first, so I knew what was going in the box, and I got the basis for the box, so I knew everything would fit in, and then I built it around the box, really. But that was the idea which I first came to about small footprinting the terrain, so I wanted to get it all in the storage box, and that neatly fits into one of the shelves I've got in one of the cabinets in my study, which is where I'm in at the moment. And I think that that's been better than creating stuff in the same space that wouldn't have fit so well if I hadn't thought about that previously, or stuff which because I'm gaming at a different scale on the table, it's 1 to 20 or 1 to 33, I can get away with that small footprinting. I think it is generally more difficult in a modern game when you've got a skirmish game, because your footprints of the buildings are, your ground scale is different, your footprints are bigger. But I still think it's a good idea if you scratch building is to think about the space that's going to take up when it's finished. And you want to allocate that space before you actually build the thing in the first place. You want to be thinking about that when you're creating your little footprint, on MDF or hardboard for the building in the first place.
It's really interesting. I mean, if you're out there and you're listening to this and you've got a really novel storage solution, we'd love to know about it. I'd love to know about it. You can. We haven't got a sort of corporate tweet, have we? I suppose you can tweet at TooFatLardies and Richard can then sift through them all, or you can tweet me at DozyBugger, and I'll be really interested in seeing what people have got for their storage solutions. And Sydney is at Roundwoods World while we're at it. You can pull him in as well.
I think it's interesting because it is a universal problem, and I don't know anybody who doesn't have it. But equally, I don't think any bugger's got the solution.
No, well, I think the solution, Rich, you said it. It's about being organised and thinking ahead and being structured, which are all things that actually, as gamers, I think a lot of us are not very good at, because we see something shiny and we go and buy it, and then we think, oh, that's lovely. Now what do I do with it?
Yeah, tell me about it. Braycourt Manor.
Well, indeed, yeah. What a lovely building that is.
But we have used that I've now owned for 2 years, because you go, look at this on eBay. And
that's right. And it's a lovely building. We're going to have a really good game with it one day.
Yeah.
If it's still in one piece when we get there.
One day.
Probably. Well, you've probably thrown it in a corner. It's probably smashed into 1,000 pieces.
Very careful with it, actually, because I'm tidy.
Well, before this degenerates into internecine warfare, I'd just like to thank you both very much for that very interesting chat. Very interesting as always. And my thanks in particular to Ned, who tells me that he's a big man down under. Thank you, Ned, for that. And thank you for the photos, Ned. They've been forwarded to the New South Wales Constabulary. They will be speaking to you soon, sir. So before we go, I thought we could play a wishing game. Yes, a wishing game, which takes a bit of time to get my mouth around. But as the UK emerges from lockdown...
You better go to North South Wales Police as well then, mate.
As we emerge in the UK from lockdown, what are we looking forward to the most in terms of our new freedoms? And most importantly, what do you plan to do about those hopes? What do we think might change in the future? Are we going to go back to what we were doing before, or is the future going to look a little bit different?
I'm looking forward to going to the pub. I walked past one today. I went out for a walk. I haven't been out for a walk for about 6 weeks because the doctor said, don't go out for a walk. But I got bored and went out, did 5 miles over the fields today. And on the way back, I went past a little country pub and it was open. And there was the garden, not entirely full of people, but about 2/3 full of people, with enough space for me to have gone in and had a beer. And I thought, ooh, but I didn't. Because that's the other thing the doctors told me not to do, go in pubs. So I didn't, but I am really looking forward now to the sun shining and getting out in the boozer with my mates and planning a battlefield tour. So that's kind of 2 things in one, but that's what I want to do.
Yeah, about you, Nicholas?
I'm, you can thrash me for being sentimental, but I'm looking forward to seeing you two old buggers, because we've only been staring at, cameras of each other. And I want to sort of rub your lovely head there, Sid, and just, give you a big kiss. But to be able to share a beer and to play a game together would be fantastic, wouldn't it? I think, I feel a bit, what's the word? Zoom game. I feel a bit Zoom gamed out. I've been playing a lot of Zoom games. I've been playing a lot of Zoom games, but I want to get some proper spacing around the table now. Most importantly, what I want to do, because I've not been able to run a game, because I can't run any games. on Zoom. I can't get a table set up and get the cameras, going. And I've got, 18 months worth of frenzied activity of new buildings and figures that I want to get on the table.
Yeah.
I want to play. I want to run a game, get some people and play that, and go to the club and play it, and go to a show and get some people around and feel the buzz that goes with all of that. That's what I want, and it's getting closer. Whether we're, I don't think we're at shows yet. We've got a couple of games days that are up in the diary. I think you've got details of those, Sid.
The first event. That's,
June.
Yeah, sharp practice, which I'm sure we'll talk about. I know, Sid, you wanted to talk about that at the end, but yeah, June, and it looks like the club's going to be back together towards the end of May, which is the latest figures that we have from our club venue. So it's still 5 weeks away, something like that, 6 weeks away. But it's I think the light is at the end of the tunnel for us here in the UK, because obviously the vaccination program has been pretty effective in terms of getting us all jabbed up. So we can hope. Well, I think we're all starting to feel a bit demob happy. So I'm sorry to anybody listening to us elsewhere in the world where they haven't had their jabs, but there you go. That's life. I'm sorry. I can only apologise.
But I do think there are still great games you can have via. I think the Zoom game will stay with us, even if we do get out of lockdown. The Zoom game will always be there. There's no better way to connect internationally and play games internationally with people.
Absolutely right. And that's been the big learning experience, Sid.
Yeah, I think we take away from the period of isolation and lockdown the best bits of it. The fact that we have stayed in touch, we've made a lot of new friends, I think, virtually, and it'd be great to meet them in person. I think we do take away things which we've really enjoyed, like meeting up with people internationally who we just wouldn't have had a chance to play games with. And then I think hopefully we get rid of some of the rubbish from lockdown, which is not being able to see our friends and relatives around the place. And commiserations to everyone who isn't in a good situation and they are still in lockdown. Hopefully that'll change in the near future. I think somebody asked me at the weekend, do we just go back to what we were doing before? And I don't think we do, because I think it will take some time in wargaming as in everything else to sort of work through, what we've done. But I do think that, we probably can approach playing a lot of the games that we've thought about, we've talked about, we've painted figures for. And I think that's going to be a great period. People are going to be very energized and seeing what everyone else has been working on. I think that's the thing which I've missed the most. It's just being able to talk to people in a normal environment and actually physically see what they have been working on. I work with Zoom an awful lot on calls during all the day. So Zoom games is kind of my idea of hell in the evenings, to be honest, in a lot of ways. So I'm really keen on actually physically seeing what people have been doing. I think it is a visual hobby, and I've really, really missed that. But
many people I've spoken to who've gamed with you on Zoom have confirmed that it's their idea of hell too. So.
And the other thing that I'm really looking forward to, and I hope we can get to this soon, is the Battlefield tour, Rich.
Yeah,
I did mention
I've
to
got
my wife.
Little handkerchief knotted up on a stick with all my stuff in it ready to go, and I am ready to go the minute Sydney whips out his Battlefield challenge, hopefully not in bloody Grimsby. I'm ready to go because I am absolutely chomping at the bit to get out there and do some Battlefield walking. And
I have a great challenge. I have two great challenges waiting to be fulfilled. So we will not talk about that now. We'll talk about that on another moment, another Oddcast maybe. But rest assured, I have been working hard on those.
Good man.
Well, chaps, thanks very much for another interesting chat. That's all, ladies and gentlemen, we've got the time for at the moment. But before we go, I'd just like to say that with our Wargaming Diaries soon opening up again, if anyone's got an event or show they want to mention, then please do drop any of us or all of us a message via the website. There is a sharp practice event at Bristol Independent Gamers in Bristol, United Kingdom in June, and Clotted Lard in Exeter on the 18th of September. I'm sure many, many more events will be added to that. So please let us know and we can give you a shout out. But that's all for tonight. So thank you as always for joining us. And we will see you again and listen, you will hear us again on the next Oddcast. So my thanks to Rich and Nick, and of course to Roger Barraclough and the gang who are going to play us out. Thank you and good night.
In tonight's show, Sydney Roundwood was joined by Nick Skinner and Richard Clark, with music by Roger Barraclough and his band.